I went to Paris to visit my son, but my daughter-in-law claimed he was away on business. She had no idea that I'd heard him moaning behind a locked door that very night. Watching my son, Jean-Pierre, learn to walk again in this garden. I know I have won, but a year ago, when he suddenly fell silent for 6 months, I was just a worried widow in Provence. I had to go to Paris alone to confront Mathilde, his beautiful young wife, and uncover a horrifying truth hidden within the walls of the Montaigne villa. It all started with a letter, returned with the cold stamp. No recipient. My life, Émilie Dubois' life, had always been a simple one. I lived alone in a small house in Provence, my days passing slowly with my embroidery and the lavender garden in front of my porch. My greatest joy was the weekly calls from Jean-Pierre, my only son. He was a talented architect living in Paris, the pride of my life. But for 6 months, that peace had been shattered by an unnerving silence. The silence began with unanswered phone calls. At first, I told myself he was busy, but then the letters I wrote went unanswered. Last week, for his birthday, I had carefully sent a hand-embroidered card, a small gift that had taken me a month to complete. Yesterday, it came back to my mailbox, a cold red line slashed across it, next to the typed words, "No recipient." No recipient. Those 2 words were a dagger to my heart. How could my son be a no recipient in his own home? My heart grew heavy, and a sense of foreboding I had never felt before began to rise, cold and unshakable. That night, I could not sleep. A mother's intuition told me this was not just about being busy. This was something far worse. The next morning, I made my decision. I could not sit here and wait in anxiety any longer. I had to go. I packed my bags quickly. My luggage was simple, nothing more than a few old clothes, a scarf I had embroidered with lavender, and most importantly, an old photograph of my son and me, set in a small silver frame. It was taken on the day Jean-Pierre graduated from university, his smile radiant and full of hope. I took the earliest train to Paris. The journey lasted for hours, taking me from the peaceful lavender fields of Provence, through lush countryside, and finally into the hustle and bustle of the capital. When I stepped out of the Gare de Lyon, I felt overwhelmed. Towering buildings scraped the sky. A torrent of humanity rushed past me. The cacophony of horns, voices, and shouts merged into a chaotic, alien sound. I stood there, a country widow, lost in this vast city, clutching the strap of my old handbag. But fear did not deter me. I had only one goal, to find my son. I had to know the truth behind his silence. I gave the taxi driver Jean-Pierre's address. The car sped through bustling avenues and finally stopped before an impressive building, the Montaigne Villa. I recognized it from the pictures my son had sent. The tall, black iron gates stood silent. Behind them, a manicured garden looked cold and lifeless. I paid the taxi, pulled my small suitcase to the gate, and rang the bell. After a long moment, there was a click, and the gate slowly swung open. A young woman appeared at the main door. She was tall and slender, dressed in an elegant black silk dress. Her blonde hair was swept up in a perfect coif. It was Mathilde, Jean-Pierre's wife. She looked even more beautiful than in the photographs, but as her eyes scanned me from head to toe, I felt no warmth, only a coldness, and an undisguised flicker of contempt. "Mrs. Dubois," she said, her voice flat, without a hint of surprise. "I wasn't expecting you." "Is Jean-Pierre home, dear?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm afraid he's not," Mathilde replied instantly, without a moment's hesitation. "He's on an important business trip in Berlin. He must have forgotten to tell you." The answer was too quick, too smooth. "A business trip? You've come a long way," she continued with forced politeness. "Please, come in and rest for a moment before you head back." She did not lead me to the main hall. Instead, She showed me into a small, dark sitting room for visitors and then disappeared, leaving me alone in the cold silence of the villa. I sat on the velvet sofa, a sense of displacement washing over me. This villa, for all its splendor, felt strangely empty. I looked around. The walls were adorned with abstract art, expensive but soulless. There were no family photos, none of the architectural drawings Jean-Pierre had been so proud of. There was no trace that my son truly lived here. A moment later, Mathilde returned with a cup of herbal tea. "He'll be gone for about a week," she said, placing the cup on the table, her voice still cold and unconvincing. "You should take the evening train back to Provence. There is nothing for you in Paris." It was a polite dismissal. As I sipped my tea, a maid glided past the doorway. She wore a grey uniform and moved without a sound, like a ghost. When she caught a glimpse of me, she startled and quickly bowed her head, scurrying away. Not a single greeting, not a smile. "I think I'll stay for one night," I said, putting the cup down. "The long journey has tired me." Mathilde shrugged, a gesture of annoyance. "As you wish. There is a guest room down the hall." That night, I lay awake in the strange room, unable to sleep. The coldness of this house, the emptiness, Mathilde's unconvincing lies, and the fearful look in the maid's eyes. All these disparate pieces were forming a terrifying picture in my mind. My mother's intuition was screaming once more. Something terrible was happening within the walls of this villa, and my son was at the heart of it. The next morning, I decided I would not sit quietly in my room. I had to find out for myself. I left the sitting room and began to walk down the wide, cold corridors of the villa. In a hidden hallway at the back of the house, in the staff quarters, I came across an elderly man carefully dusting an antique cabinet. He wore the faded uniform of a butler. When his eyes met mine, they showed a clear anxiety. But unlike the other staff, he did not look away. "Hello," I said softly. "You are?" "I am Pierre, madam. The butler of this house," he replied, his voice deep and a little weary. I looked directly into his eyes that had seen much. I decided to be direct. "Pierre, my son, Jean-Pierre, where is he?" Pierre's body tensed. He stopped dusting, his expression becoming strained. "Madam, I cannot say." "Cannot, or are not permitted to," I pressed. He did not answer. Just then, footsteps echoed down the hall. Mathilde appeared. Her gaze was sharp as a knife, darting from me to Pierre. "Pierre," she said, her voice icy, "is your work not finished yet?" "I am on it, madam," Pierre replied, quickly bowing his head and resuming his dusting. The connection between us was severed. Mathilde stood there, arms crossed, watching until I turned and walked away. But I had seen what I needed to see. I had seen the fear in Pierre's eyes, and I knew he held a piece of the truth. That night I could not sleep. The brief encounter with Pierre haunted my thoughts. I decided to take a risk. When the villa was completely silent, I crept out of my room and made my way to the kitchen area. As I had hoped, Pierre was there, sitting alone at an old wooden table, drinking a cup of coffee. Seeing me, he jumped to his feet. "Mrs. Dubois, you should not be here." "Pierre," I said, my voice a desperate whisper, "please, I just want to know the truth. Is my son all right? Where is he?" He glanced nervously toward the door. "The mistress will be furious if she finds you here. I am not leaving until I know my son is safe," I said, my voice firm. I looked at him more closely. "Have you worked here long, Pierre?" "Madam, I have been the butler of this villa for over 30 years, since the time of the previous owner," he replied, a hint of nostalgia in his voice. "I was here when young Master Jean-Pierre and the new mistress moved in." I looked at him, hoping to find an ally. "Then you must have seen my son, Jean-Pierre. He is a good man. He is not the sort to disappear for 6 months without a single word to his mother." Those words seemed to reach him. He let out a long, heavy sigh. "Sit down," he whispered, pulling out a chair for me. Once I was seated, he looked at me, his voice dropping to a near inaudible level. "Master Jean-Pierre is not on a business trip, madam." My heart clenched. He had an accident, a very serious accident, almost 6 months ago. 6 months. The exact amount of time he'd been silent. He was badly injured, and he is not well, Pierre continued, avoiding my gaze. The mistress brought him here to be cared for. He is in a room in the West Wing. The mistress allows no one to visit, not even the staff, only she and a private nurse. He paused, then looked at me with a warning in his eyes. "Mrs. Dubois, be careful. This house is not what it used to be. The new mistress, she is very different." I sat there, in the cold kitchen, a chill running down my spine. My son was right here, in this very house, imprisoned after a serious accident, and his wife was hiding it all. I knew I would not be leaving Paris. I would not go anywhere until I found out the truth behind that locked door. Pierre's words replayed in my mind, giving me no peace. The West Wing. I had to get there. That night, I waited until the clock struck 2 in the morning, when the entire villa was deep in sleep. I crept from my room, my bare feet silent on the cold marble floors. The shadows in the vast hallways seemed to thicken, swallowing all sound. I made my way toward the west wing of the villa, a section I had never been allowed to enter. The corridor here was narrower and darker. Most of the doors were shut tight. But then, I saw it. At the end of the hall there was a heavy oak door, completely different from the others. And on it, not a normal handle, but a large steel lock that gleamed in the moonlight filtering through a window. My heart pounded in my chest. Why would a room inside a house need to be secured with such a massive lock? And then, I heard it. A faint, weak sound, coming from within. A moan, then a broken, incoherent whisper. I held my breath, pressing my ear against the cold wood. The whisper came again, a little clearer this time. It was a weak, hoarse voice, but I recognized it. It was Jean-Pierre's voice. My son was right behind this door, locked away, and he was in pain. A surge of rage and fear washed over me. I had to get in there, at any cost. Just then, a figure suddenly appeared at the end of the corridor. I spun around, startled. It was Pierre. "Madam, you should not be here," he whispered urgently. "If the mistress finds out—" "I hear him, Pierre." I cut him off. "You have to help me." Pierre looked at the locked door, then at me, his face a mask of conflict. "I cannot." "But—" he hesitated. "Every night, after checking on the master, she hangs the key on a hook behind the wine rack in the pantry. She thinks no one notices." He added, "The nurse who cares for him is named Therese. She goes out to the back garden for a cigarette every morning at 10 o'clock sharp." He had given me 2 leads, but could I trust him? The next morning I decided to test it. At 10 o'clock exactly, I went to the back garden. I saw a young woman in a nurse's uniform standing under an oak tree. It had to be Therese. I approached her and began my performance. I told her of a mother's heartbreak, of being kept from her own son. Seeing the genuine desperation in my eyes, her expression seemed to soften. "His condition." "It is very poor, madam," Therese finally admitted. "He is very weak, often nauseous, and his condition always seems to worsen, right after the mistress visits and gives him his herbal tea herself. Poison." The thought was sharp and clear. I thought I had found an ally. But that evening, as I was tiptoeing toward the pantry, I heard voices coming from Mathilde's room, the door slightly ajar. It was Mathilde's voice, and Therese's. "She believed me," Therese said. "She thinks I am on her side. I told her part of the truth, about the symptoms, just as you instructed." "Good," Mathilde's cold voice replied. Continue to earn her trust. Report her every move to me. You will be well compensated. I stood frozen in the darkness of the hallway. An ally? No. That meeting had been another trap. Even Pierre, who had told me how to approach Therese, was likely part of this charade. In this house, I could trust no one. I was utterly alone. And I knew that if I was going to save my son, I would have to do it myself. Therese's betrayal was a heavy blow, but it also gave me a brutal clarity. I could no longer count on anyone's pity or help. I had to find the proof myself. That night I did not hesitate. I crept down to the kitchen and into the cold pantry. Just as Pierre had said, the key to the west wing was hanging on a hidden hook behind the wine rack. My heart was pounding, but my hand was steady. I took the key, but I did not go to Jean-Pierre's room. I knew that bursting in now would be too dangerous. Instead, I went somewhere else. Mathilde's office. The door was unlocked. I slipped inside, enveloped by darkness. Using the faint light from my phone, I began to search. I was not looking aimlessly. I was looking for proof of a conspiracy. In a separately locked drawer, I found what I needed. An enormous life insurance policy for Jean-Pierre, with Mathilde as the sole beneficiary, signed just weeks after his accident. Beside it were receipts from a Swiss pharmacy for a strange medication I had never heard of. But the most horrifying discovery lay at the bottom. A file of old newspaper clippings. They all reported on the accidental deaths of Mathilde's two previous wealthy husbands. One died from a fall down the stairs, the other from food poisoning. Both had left her a fortune. The Black Widow. The words flashed in my mind. My son was not her first victim. I photographed everything with my phone, but I knew this was not enough. I needed to know who her accomplices were. My mind went to Caleb, Mathilde's shady brother whom I had met once. The next day, under the pretext of taking a walk, I hailed a taxi to the address of Caleb's office, a small investment firm. Taking advantage of the lunch hour, I slipped into his office. And there, on his unlocked computer, I found the final pieces: falsified contracts, records of fund transfers from Jean-Pierre's accounts to his company, and emails with Mathilde discussing the need to resolve the problem quickly. Everything was clear. This was a perfectly planned conspiracy for fraud, and most likely, murder. After uncovering enough evidence of Mathilde and Caleb's plot, I still felt a piece was missing. Why would Jean-Pierre, an intelligent and sharp architect, fall so easily into their trap? I decided I had to get into the room in the West Wing. That night, I took the key again and crept to the end of the hall. This time, I inserted the key into the lock. The door opened without a sound. Inside, the room was dark and smelled heavily of medicine. On the large bed, my son lay, thin and frail. He was asleep, his breathing labored. I walked closer, tears welling in my eyes. I did not dare wake him. I just sat quietly in the chair beside his bed, watching him. Then, my eyes fell on a small notebook on the nightstand. I carefully opened it. It was Jean-Pierre's journal. The last entries were written in a shaky, almost illegible hand. "Mother," he wrote, "if you are reading this, it means you have found me. I am sorry for the silence. I know everything." My heart stopped. I knew about her plan early on. I knew about the substance in the tea, but I could do nothing. She threatened me. She said that if I resisted, if I went to the police, she would find a way to harm you. She knew you were my only weakness. So, I chose silence. I chose to endure, hoping for an opportunity one day. Every day, I try to fight. Not for myself, but to protect you. The journal fell from my hands. Tears streamed down my face. A truth even more horrific than the murder plot became devastatingly clear. Mathilde was not killing him outright. She was too cunning for that. A sudden death would invite scrutiny. Instead, she chose a crueler method. She was keeping him alive, but in a state of living death, completely incapacitated. That way, she could play the part of the devoted wife while slowly draining his assets, forcing him to sign transfer documents that no one would question. A natural death from his illness would come later, after everything was hers. My son, the child I thought was a helpless victim, was in fact a silent hero. He had not surrendered. He had fought in the only way he could. He had endured all this agony, alone, just to protect me. I looked at my son lying on the bed, my heart aching with both sorrow and a rising resilience. I would not let his sacrifice be in vain. I would get him out of here. After that horrifying night, I knew I could not act alone. There was only one person I could possibly trust, despite my lingering doubts: Pierre. The next morning, I found him in the garden shed, the only place without security cameras. I told him everything: the insurance policy, the dead husbands, Jean-Pierre's note, and Mathilde's plan of slow poisoning. As he listened, Pierre's expression shifted from worry to cold fury. "I have suspected for a long time," he said, his voice low, "but I had no proof. Madam, I will help you. For Master Jean-Pierre, and for this house, our plan was meticulously crafted. First, we needed undeniable proof. That day, while cleaning, Pierre skillfully obtained a sample of the herbal tea Mathilde prepared for Jean-Pierre. I secretly took the sample to a private lab, disguised as a common tea sample. The results came back 2 days later, confirming my worst fears. It contained a small but steady dose of oleander extract, a heart-stopping poison. Our chance came at the end of the week. Mathilde and Caleb had an important meeting with investors outside of Paris and would be gone all day. Pierre, with his years of experience as butler, knew exactly how to disable the security cameras and motion sensors in the West Wing for a short period without triggering an alarm. At high noon, while the nurse Therese was at lunch, we made our move. Pierre and I rushed into Jean-Pierre's room. My son was awake but terribly weak. "Mother," he whispered, his eyes filling with tears at the sight of me. "Hush, my son," I said, my voice filled with determination. "I'm getting you out of here." At the same time, a private ambulance, arranged by my lawyer, Mr. Moreau, had pulled up quietly to the back gate. We helped Jean-Pierre, emaciated and barely able to stand, out of the room. Every step was a monumental effort, a race against time. Just as we got Jean-Pierre into the ambulance and closed the doors, I saw Mathilde and Caleb's car approaching in the distance. They were back earlier than expected. "Go!" I urged the driver. The ambulance sped away, heading to a discreet private clinic in the suburbs, where a medical team was waiting. I had saved my son, but the fight was just beginning. Mathilde's reaction was faster than I'd anticipated. The very next morning she reported me to the police, but she did not report a missing person. She accused me, Jean-Pierre's own mother, of having kidnapped my son. She appeared on television, tears in her eyes, performing a flawless act. She spoke of a mentally unstable mother-in-law, jealous of her son's happiness, who had taken advantage of Jean-Pierre's illness to abduct him for his fortune. She used my own 6 months of silence against me, claiming I had cut off all contact with the family. All of Paris seemed to believe the story of the pitiable young wife. But while Mathilde was busy with her drama, we were working quietly. At the clinic, doctors ran a series of tests. The results confirmed the worst. Jean-Pierre was suffering from chronic poisoning by oleander extract, a toxin that accumulates slowly in the body. They said it would take a very long time for him to recover. With the lab results and Pierre's testimony, Mr. Moreau officially filed a complaint against Mathilde and Caleb with the public prosecutor. The real battle had begun. Mathilde's lawyers tried to turn the tables, suggesting I had poisoned my own son to frame her, but they had not anticipated what I had found. At the hearing, Mr. Moreau presented everything: the enormous life insurance policy, the pharmacy receipts from Switzerland, the shady money transfers from Caleb's office, and the final blow: The file on the accidental deaths of Mathilde's two previous wealthy husbands. When the old newspaper articles were displayed, when the name the Black Widow was spoken, I saw Mathilde's confident facade crumble. Her performance was over. Immediately following the hearing, arrest warrants were issued. Mathilde and Caleb were arrested for conspiracy to commit murder and aggravated fraud. That day, I sat in an interrogation room, trembling but resolute, and told the police my entire story, from the no-recipient letter and the trip to Paris, to the words my son had written in his journal. The battle was over. Justice had spoken. After the trial concluded, I took Jean-Pierre away from Paris. We returned to Provence, to the clean air and the tranquility of the lavender fields. I bought a small country house next to my own, so he could begin his recovery. Pierre, now retired, voluntarily came to live with us to help care for him, along with a kind young nurse. The following months passed slowly. Jean-Pierre had to relearn everything, from holding a spoon to walking. But gradually, life returned to him. His shaky legs grew steadier. His weak hands were able to hold a paintbrush. And most importantly, the smile returned to his lips. A genuine smile, no longer clouded by the worries of a glamorous world. One evening, we sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the lavender fields purple. "I was wrong, Mother," he said, his voice still weak, but clear. "I was so busy chasing luxury in Paris that I forgot that true peace was right here. The love of family and home is more precious than any villa." He turned to look at me. "Did you know, during the darkest days in that room, when I could not move or speak, I could always feel your presence. I knew you were out there, looking for me. That thought alone gave me the strength to keep fighting." A single tear rolled down my cheek. His sacrifice had not been in vain, and neither had my fight. Mathilde and Caleb received long prison sentences. The empire they built on deceit had collapsed. As for us, we had found our lives again. Every evening, Jean-Pierre and I would walk together down the little dirt path between the rows of lavender. "This place is so peaceful, Mother," he said on one of our walks. I smiled and took his hand. "This is home, my son. This will always be your home." We walked together into the sunset, toward a future free of storms, filled only with peace and hope. 66. 8 seconds. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn. Enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat.